All right, everyone, welcome to AP Environmental Science. This lecture is on terrestrial biomes. Before we really begin, let me just say that most of the specific information for the specific biomes that you guys need to know will be through the biome speed dating activity, the project that you're doing in class. So we're just going to do a broad overview of terrestrial biomes in this lecture. All right, we're in topic 1.2. The enduring understanding is ecosystems are a result of biotic and abiotic interactions. Again, we will see that today. The learning objective, describe the global distribution and principal environmental aspects of terrestrial biomes. And then we'll talk about the essential knowledge towards the end. Here's the vocab. Now, what I should say is that this list of biomes that I have here is not a complete list. So we'll talk about some other biomes. You'll see some other ones in the biome speed dating activity that we'll do in class. But this is the ones that your textbook discusses, and these are the main ones that are in the AP learning objectives. However, they are not all that you need to know. We'll talk about some others in class. I'm going to skip this slide, but if you want a quick review of ecosystems and biomes, you can pause this now and watch this video from Khan Academy. So what is a biome? The last lecture we discussed the hierarchical organization of ecology, where we start with the individual, and then we have populations, which is all the individuals of a single species in a given area, the community, all of the species in a given area, all the populations of different species. The ecosystem with the abiotic factors in there as well, so all of the different populations of all the different species, plus the abiotic factors such as temperature, the air, the pH of the soil, the minerals in the soil, the water, all of that stuff. Biomes is where we're going to be at for quite a while here, and not only this PowerPoint, but the next PowerPoint as well as in class. So in this example, the biome that they're showing is the boreal forest. The boreal forest is is one of the largest biomes. It covers much of the northern hemisphere, much of the land area in the northern hemisphere, and a little bit in the southern hemisphere, like down in Patagonia. And it has a very distinct climate. A biome specifically is a large region with a distinct climate. It also has the species that are adapted to that climate. So in this case, we see some of the species that are adapted to the boreal forest. We see elk, we see grizzly bear or brown bear, we see beaver, snowshoe hare, moose. And all of those species are adapted to the boreal forest. We also have the plants that are adapted to the boreal forest. So we have the fir trees or the spruce trees, whichever they're showing, the grasses, the wildflowers that are all adapted to the boreal forest. Now, what I should mention is that there is much more in a boreal forest than just forest. There is also the meadows, there is the open spaces between the trees, there is the riparian areas, which is essentially the waterways. And you have a lot of different areas in a boreal forest, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Or I guess we'll talk about it right now. So since you guys are in Colorado, an example that might register with you. Most of you, if not all of you, have probably been up into the mountains, and many of you have been to Rocky Mountain National Park. So imagine going from Denver up into the mountains. Okay, say that you're going up to Rocky Mountain National Park. You're going to start at around 5,280 feet in Denver, and you're going to be in a short grass prairie. That is not part of the montane forest. You are going to transition from prairie or temperate grassland, as I should more appropriately call it. And as you go up into elevation into the foothills, you will get into the montane forest. Okay, so you'll start being in the montane forest in the foothills. As you go up the foothills into the mountains, say that you go up into Rocky Mountain National Park, and then you go for a hike in the park, you're going to transition from a lot of different ecosystems, right? When you're in the foothills, you're going to be in this open parkland that's dominated by ponderosa pine. As you get up in elevation a little bit more, the ponderosa pine is going to disappear, and you're going to start to get mixed forests of aspen, pine, fir, and spruce. Okay, so the species composition of the plants are going to change. Then as you get up into and that's the montane zone. Once you get up into the subalpine zone, you're going to get into spruce and fir forest. Okay, and then that's pretty much where it tops out. Once we get to tree line, we're done with the montane forest, and above that is the alpine tundra, a different biome. But the montane forest is going to include that open parkland in the foothills where you have a tree here, a tree there, and the grasses in between, dominated by ponderosa pine. Then you're going to get up into the montane zone, which is going to be a mixed forest. You're going to have some ponderosa pine, you're going to have some aspen, you're going to have some subalpine fir. Then you get to the subalpine zone, which is going to be dominated by subalpine fir and Engelmann spruce and mostly fir and spruce. Okay, but all of that is going to be this montane forest biome, which is recognized by some authors. Some authors would call this a coniferous forest biome. Some authors would call this part of the boreal forest, actually. All right, but whatever they call it, it's all part of this biome. So there's going to be multiple ecosystems per biome, is what I'm trying to hammer home with this. So stepping back a little bit and looking at a broad overview of what makes a biome, biomes are created by the abiotic factors of the environment, okay? So the main factors are going to be temperature and precipitation. That's going to be number 1 and number 2, okay? And that's what you see on this graph. You guys should be able to read one of these graphs and tell me what the average temperature of a temperate seasonal forest is, what the average precipitation of a boreal forest is. Or you should be given, you may be given this graph with unknowns. So maybe tropical forest is not written there and you'll have to tell me that, high temperature, high precipitation, oh, we're probably in a tropical rainforest. If we have, let's say, temperature that gets near freezing but not quite freezing and very high precipitation, we're probably in a temperate rainforest. Okay, so you should be able to tell me these biomes based off of this graph. Okay, next important is altitude and latitude. Those are definitely important as well. The difference there, altitude is how high in elevation you are. Latitude is whether you are further north or further south, closer or further from the poles, closer or further from the equator. Okay. Some other less dominant factors that aren't really going to be tested as much. You'll have soil type, biomes, different biomes definitely have different characteristic soils. And part of that is due to the abiotic factors that structure the biome. The soil composition will help structure the biome itself, but the vegetation is going to have this feedback where it goes and influences the soil type. All right, average wind speed and duration. You could have enough precipitation and enough temperature to have a temperate rainforest where you'll have trees. Note it's a forest. But if there is constant high winds, like constant high winds all year, you're going to either have stunted trees or you're going to have so much wind that trees aren't going to be able to survive and you'll instead have a grassland. Okay, it might instead look more like a temperate grassland. All right, I don't know why cold desert's there, but a temperate grassland. Just because of those high wind speeds. Okay, so for example, there's areas in Hawaii that get enough that are constant high temperature, right, in this zone, and they get lots and lots of precipitation. And they'd probably be in this tropical rainforest or tropical seasonal forest, but they are so windy that trees can't really grow. They can't reach any height, so it's only grasses that dominate. And then you'll have sun exposure and geography. If you noticed on the previous slide, if you have a mountain slope, you'll typically have the biomes shift based off of whether you have southern or northern exposure. Okay, so subalpine zone might be higher on the south side and it might be lower on the north side because of the sun exposure, the slope. All right, and then geography as well, but we won't really get into the geography. It should seem relatively straightforward, but I wanted to reemphasize this, that elevation or altitude and latitude have an influence on biomes. So as you go up from the North Pole down south, what you're going to transition from polar ice down to tundra, down to taiga, which is boreal forest, down to temperate forest, down to tropical rainforest. Okay, you're going to have tropical rainforest down here at the equator. You're going to have temperate forests right here in the temperate zone. All right, you're going to have boreal forest up here in the north, and then tundra, and then ice. Okay. Um, all of that is definitely generalization. You're going to have deserts, you're going to have grasslands in that area and all of that area as well, but it's just generalizing it. Same thing, say that we're looking at elevation or altitude. I'll use elevation because I think it's a little bit more appropriate because you're on land and you're not up in the air. But say that we are in Ecuador. When you're in Ecuador, you can get up into some mountains that are so high, above 15,000 feet, I think even above 20,000 feet, but don't quote me on that, that you're going to have glaciers up there. You're going to have polar ice at the equator, okay, because it's so high up. Just below that, you're going to have tundra. Then you're going to transition into a coniferous forest, and then into a temperate forest. And then once you get down low enough elevation, you're going to be in a tropical rainforest. In fact, Ecuador has such a great agricultural industry because they can grow just about anything based on the elevation. If you're way up here in the temperate forest and you want to grow crops that are traditionally more temperate, such as apples, roses, or peaches, you can do that at a certain elevation at the equator. But if you want to grow bananas and guavas and pineapples, you would do that at a lower elevation down in this tropical rainforest zone. Okay, so elevation definitely matters as well. So this photo is this diagram is taken right out of your textbook, the Miller and Spoolman book. These are the biomes that Miller and Spoolman recognize. And again, like I said, different authors will recognize different biomes, and it's an ever-changing list. So these are the ones in Miller and Spoolman and the ones I'm going to try to follow, but I'm going to throw some other ones in there as well. So you guys can pause this now and copy these down if you want to. Here is another list from another author, and you notice some differences. If you just look at the Sahara Desert, they don't recognize just one desert type throughout that entire thing. There is arid desert, but there's also xeric shrubland. Okay, so that's just one example that you'll see throughout. Whereas Miller and Spoolman will talk about high mountains, these guys will talk about alpine tundra, and they'll throw montane forests in there as well. And they'll distinguish montane forests, this color, from boreal forests, this color. Okay. You don't really need to worry about the semantics. No two authors are going to agree on a list of biomes. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of make up my own list for this class. All right, stepping back to temperature and precipitation, these are the main things that are going to influence biomes, and you guys are also going to have to analyze these graphs. These are known as climatographs or climatograms. I have seen both, and you'll see both as well. I'll use this one that's larger from a temperate grassland from Lawrence, Kansas. This is very similar to what you would see in Denver, Colorado. So since we're in Colorado, I thought this would be the good one to look at. Okay, it's going to be slightly different because this is further east and they probably get more precipitation. But what you have is on the x-axis, you have time, and time is in months. So you have January through December. So sometimes you'll just say CJ, F, M, A, etc., but know that it's the month of the year. On the different axes, you will have temperature and precipitation. This one is great because, well, probably not great, but this one gives you degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit, as well as inches and millimeters. You should just look at degrees Celsius and millimeters because that's what most of them are going to be in, and you should just get used to that. Okay, you should know that degrees Celsius, we're mostly looking at 0 degrees Celsius for freezing point, and then most biomes aren't going to get above 35 degrees Celsius because if they did, that'd be awfully, awfully hot because that's right around 100 degrees. Okay, you might see some deserts that top that though. All right, as well as temperate grasslands, you know, from Denver. All right, one of the key clues here is knowing that it's temperate is that it gets below freezing. Okay, so if you see something that is below freezing at any time of the year, specifically winter, it's going to be a temperate or even a polar area. If you see something that never gets below freezing, it's a good bet that it is closer to the equator. Okay, hold on one second, my phone is ringing. The other thing for temperature is it constant, such as this one down here from a tropical rainforest in Brazil, or does it change? If it changes, it's going to be temperate as well, but if it doesn't change, it's going to be a little bit more tropical, or at least closer to the equator, where they have consistently high temperatures year-round. All right. For the precipitation, we're looking at how much precipitation is there. Now, precipitation you will often see as a bar graph instead of this shaded in like histogram looking thing. Sorry, you'll see precipitation as a histogram rather than the shaded in looking graph, but it's showing the same thing. Now for precipitation, if there's a whole lot of precipitation, then your best bet is a forest. If there's very little precipitation, least amount of precipitation is going to be a desert or a polar grassland. Moving up into with precipitation, you'll get grassland and then forest. So forests are going to have the highest, especially rainforests, and then the lowest will be deserts. Should be rather straightforward. One of the odd things that always trips students up is that you have two y-axes. So make sure that you're looking at the right part of the graph, the right data point, whether it's the histogram or the line graph for the right axis. Okay, so just take a moment to look through these. We have tropical desert. Note that it's consistently high temperature year-round. So we're looking at something that's closer to the equator, and very, very low precipitation. So we're looking at something that is closer to a desert. So this is a tropical desert. Okay, you won't have to tell me that it's from Saudi Arabia, but a tropical desert is the biome. Okay, so just focus on the biomes. If we move over to the temperate desert, you note that the temperate desert changes, the temperature changes year-round. Okay, so it's colder in the winter and warmer in the summer. One of the tricky things with this is if this was instead of Reno, Nevada, if this was in, let's say, Australia somewhere in the outback, the months would appear backwards. Okay, it would still get, maybe close to freezing, depending on where in Australia you are, probably not freezing, but close to freezing maybe. And then during June, July, August, their winter, and then during their summer, November, December, January, February, it would be a lot warmer. So that might trip you up. That might be a tricky one if it was in the southern hemisphere and it's temperate. Okay, I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You can pause this now and go through each one if you want to, but we'll practice these in class. Another thing that we'll do with the Biome Project is look at adaptations that the flora and fauna for each biome have. So I'm not going to go through those here. However, I do just want to quickly mention that plants and animals are well adapted to the climatic conditions that they find themselves in. If there is heavy precipitation year-round and high temperatures, plants are going to have adaptations to live in those conditions. Conversely, if it gets very, very cold in the winter and very, very hot in the summer, and there's very little moisture, plants are going to be adapted to those conditions. Animals are also going to be adapted to those conditions, but animals are generally more mobile, so they may, move from one biome to another seasonally, depending on migration patterns and stuff like that. But plants and animals are definitely adapted to the biomes that they find themselves in, or that they have evolved to live in. Okay, so the different communities, the different populations of the different species are going to be adapted for the biomes that they live in. And I have 3 examples down here on the bottom. Okay, just think about some of the similarities, think about some of the differences between the plants and animals that you would find in these places. And note that all of these share roughly the same latitude. If we move across from east to west in North America, we would go from eastern temperate forest to temperate grassland to desert. Okay, so think about some of the adaptations that the plants and animals in these different ecosystems, in these different biomes rather, have to deal with. Right. Another thing that I want to illustrate is that biomes are very dynamic. They are not static at all. They are dynamic, meaning that they change. Okay, so they are subject to change over time. Biomes evolve. Okay. Um, for instance, if we look at North America, 65, or sorry, this is the late Cretaceous from 85 million years ago, um, we would, in Colorado, be underwater right here in Denver. Okay. Um, If you notice, Greenland, Ellesmere's Island, way up here in the north, are going to, I can't tell if it's forest or grassland or whatever it is, but it's definitely ice free. All right, there were dinosaurs living in the Arctic during the Cretaceous. Okay, very different biomes than what we'll see now, and the plants and animals will be very different as well. Okay, if we contrast that to 2.5 million years ago, over here on the right, um, you notice that the biomes are slightly different than they are right now. If we are again right here in Denver, we have temperate grassland. Sorry, is that a little bit? That's right around Denver, but it's a little bit off. But whatever. We have temperate grassland. You have the ice up here in the Arctic, but note that most of Canada has Hudson Bay and all of the islands of Canada are dry land. Note that Florida is mostly underwater. Those biomes are changing. They actually went from aquatic to terrestrial biomes. Okay, this is an ongoing process, and it has to do with changing climate over all this time, global climate, as well as changes in plate tectonics. The continents will move. You don't really see that as much here, but mostly changes in climate. And it's a natural ongoing process. However, biotic factors can influence biome distribution as well, notably, especially for this class, human factors. Okay, we can change biomes also. But what I want to back up and start with is that different biomes offer different natural resources. You're not going to find much timber in a desert. You're not going to find very good farmland in the desert. You're not going to find, very much farmland in the alpine tundra. Okay, so we get different resources from these different biomes. Okay, so if you're in a forest, you're probably going to be getting timber. If you are in a grassland, you're going to be doing agriculture, and if you are in, you know, a forest as well, my mind keeps going back to forest, maybe hunting is a little bit better, whatever it is. Mining and mountains. Okay, different biomes are going to offer different natural resources, and one of the problems with human use of those resources is that we often extract more than the system can support. It becomes unsustainable, and we can literally change biomes. Okay, maybe the clear cutting of one forest type leads to the invasion of another forest type. Maybe the overgrazing of sheep, in this case in the southwest United States, can lead to desertification. Okay, so taking maybe something that was a xeric scrubland into a true desert, or maybe taking something that was a forest, even making it a desert. Okay, and then we can change it the opposite direction, where we're making this artificial looking grassland out of a desert, where we have heavy irrigation and farms in Saudi Arabia, but they're extracting more water than the system can support, than the aquifers can recharge. Okay, so we can change biomes. Summing that up, here we have altered many biomes beyond recognition, and we've changed some biomes to another. We'll talk about this much later on, but the main one that we're going to be interested in for this class is desertification. And that is taking any biome and turning it into basically a desert. Okay, so it could be a forest going to desert, it could be a grassland going to desert. The removal of vegetation is typically going to be for agriculture, for clear-cutting forest for whatever reason. There are many reasons, but typically for timber or for agriculture. Mining can alter biomes, and urbanization can as well. In fact, there are a lot of different urban biomes, or at least anthropogenic biomes, that people are starting to recognize, that ecologists are starting to recognize, but we're not really going to talk about them too much at this point in this class. Okay. The other way that we can change all of this is through human-induced climate change, anthropogenic climate change. Okay, so for example, the Arctic tundra is warming. So as the Arctic tundra warms, boreal forests can survive further and further and further north, and they are advancing north. The second bullet point maybe hits home a little bit more in Colorado, especially if you've been up to the alpine zone. And in the alpine zone, you've probably seen lots of tiny little plants, beautiful looking wildflowers. And as it warms, tree line advances further up the mountain, up the mountain, up the mountain, and crowds out all of these little wildflowers that can only survive in the alpine zone. Eventually, there will be no alpine, and it will be just forest all the way up the mountain. Okay, and then again, desertification. So one example of ways that humans have altered biomes is the chaparral biome, also called the Mediterranean biome. It's one of the rarest biomes in the world, only found around the Mediterranean Sea, South Africa, Southern Australia, and California and Baja California on the west coast of North America. Most of that habitat has been lost. Okay, especially in the Mediterranean, but also in South Africa and California, etc. If we look at this beautiful photograph from Tuscany, it might look like an idyllic pastoral scene, but we see nothing natural here. What we see are cultivated crops, a house, the ornamental plants planted around this house, and that's about it. You know, you might have a little touch of forest right there, maybe a little copse right there, but not enough to support much. Other than that, you have grapes, you have olives, you have wheat, and other cereals, but you don't have anything natural except for maybe that small section of forest. But even that small section of forest is probably very influenced by humans, probably is managed by humans, and something is taken from that forest by humans. Okay, if you're removing 90% of a habitat, you're going to remove many of the individual animals in that area, many of the individual plants in that area, and you could remove entire populations from that area. You could lead to the loss of species in that area or the extinction of species. Okay, so it is a very big issue, especially when we talk about biodiversity later on in the school year. All right, so that's it for biomes, or at least terrestrial biomes for right now. Again, most of the specifics for the specific biomes you'll get in class. So just going to the essential knowledge here, we talked about how biomes contain characteristic communities of plants and animals that are adapted to its climate. Okay, that will mostly be in the project that we'll talk about in class. Okay, they list some of the major terrestrial biomes. I'm going to give you a little bit larger of a list in class, especially because I've seen AP questions that are about other biomes than these ones. These are just some of the big ones. Okay, the global distribution of non-mineral terrestrial resources. So that could be stuff like timber, game for hunting. That could be soil, even though a lot of that's mineral. Whatever it is, water, trees for lumber. A lot of that is influenced, from one biome specifically, or from various biomes that have something in common, whether they're different types of forest getting different types of lumber, but they are all a result of climate, geography, latitude and altitude, the nutrient availability, and soil. Again, some of that we'll focus on a little bit more in class. And then the worldwide distribution of biomes is dynamic, and that is going to change in the future, and it has changed in the past. Some of that change is in the future is going to be due to natural processes. A lot of that change is going to be due to, and is currently due to human activity. All right, I'll see you on class. Bye.